What's up guys, Ghost here, back with episode 2 of Overwatch Knowhow, where I give you guys a few handy tips and tricks that the game doesn't actually tell you about. Most of this stuff is discovered through personal experience, so this should help some of you newer players out there. So first up, let's talk about being on fire. I'm sure most of you know that when you're on fire, that means that you're performing well, but how exactly do you get on fire? Whenever you perform an action such as dealing damage to an opponent, healing somebody, or defending an objective, you will gain a certain amount of fire. The amount gained is shown on screen depicted by a fire icon. All the fire you gain will fill up the meter underneath your health bar. Once you fill the meter past the small arrow, you will be on fire, and everybody in the game will be able to see it as well. However, your fire meter will deteriorate over time, so if you wish to stay on fire, you will have to constantly be dealing damage or healing, for example, in order to keep your meter topped off. Being on fire will not reward you with anything, but it will signify to both your team and the enemy team that you are performing well. Sound cues are a massive part of Overwatch, and understanding whose ultimate you just heard or which hero's footsteps can often play a big role. So here's a couple of ways to tell if it was your team or the enemy team. Ultimates from the enemy team will always be far louder and more audible than ultimates from your own team. In addition, non-English speaking heroes such as Genji or Zarya will always call out their ultimates in their native language if they're on the enemy team, but in English if they're on your team. Footsteps work the same way too. The footsteps of the enemy team will be roughly 3 times as loud as the footsteps of your own team. In addition, each hero has its own unique footstep sound, so not only can you tell if it's a friend or foe coming around the corner, but also which hero and whether that's a fight you want to take or not. Did you know that enemy abilities such as Reaper's Shadow Step or Reinhardt's Fire Strike will always be coloured red, but your own team's abilities will be their default colour? Next, Junkrat's ultimate Riptire. I know, probably one of the most annoying ults to newer players, right? But did you know that it can roll up buildings and through windows? Since this ult is particularly loud and can be heard rolling your way from a far off distance, players will often use windows like this to surprise unsuspecting players. If you stand close to the payload, it will actually provide a constant heal for you and your team. Definitely an added incentive to PTFO. For best results, try combining this with a Lucio, or even have a soldier throw his biotic field down on top of the payload so it moves along with your team. When Bastion sets up in sentry mode, his head gets tucked away, but a new weak spot appears on his back instead. So if you go in for the flank with Tracer, for example, then make sure you aim for his core to take him down before he notices you. Talking of Tracer, did you know that recall doesn't only take you back to where you were 3 seconds ago, but it also puts your health and ammo back to how it was 3 seconds ago too? Next up, animation cancelling. When reloading a weapon, you don't have to wait for the entire animation to finish. Take Roadhog for example. Once the ammo counter displays 4 out of 4 towards the end of the animation, you're free to break the animation via a melee or other ability, and the reload will have still happened. My personal favourite is breaking it with Take a Breather. It doesn't save you a ton of time, but it can make a small difference in an intense game when you need to get back into the fight. And finally, let's talk about health, shields and armour, because they all act differently. So health is your regular base stat that we all know about. It's coloured white and can be healed up by a number of heroes or by picking up a health pack, and it does not regenerate on its own, with the exception of Mercy, whose health automatically regenerates when she doesn't take damage. Shields and armour are very similar to health. They can both be replenished by a healer or a health pack, with the exception of Torbjorn's armour pack, which once lost, will not be replenished. The difference with shields, which are colour blue, is that after 3 seconds without taking damage, they will automatically recharge by 25 shields per second. They will always be the first thing to take damage, and the last to be healed up. So say you're playing Tracer, and you pick up an armour pack from Torb, and you get shields from Symmetra, it will go health, then armour, and finally shields. Now armour coloured in yellow is a little harder to understand. Unlike shields, it won't regenerate, but it will decrease the damage you take. Now the way this works depends on the damage projectile. Any damage of 10 or less will be cut in half. Anything above that will do 5 less damage. So Tracer is a really bad hero for dealing with a D.Va who has a large amount of armor, since her pulse pistols fire very fast but do very little damage. In fact, each shot does a maximum of 6 damage, and since that's less than 10, that damage will be cut in half by the armor, meaning she does half damage. The same goes for Reaper and Roadhog. Their weapons fire lots of little individual pellets that do low damage below 10, so they will also do half damage to armor. On the other hand, weapons that do a lot of damage like Hanzo's bow or Widowmaker's rifle are much better for dealing with armor. Hanzo's bow will do 29 all the way up to 125 damage depending on how long you draw the arrow. This will simply be reduced by 5 by the armor. So there you go guys, that wraps up episode 2. Hopefully you learnt a thing or two for anybody new coming into Overwatch. If you're not new, well, you probably already knew at least some of this stuff, and if you have any tips of your own to add down below in the comments, I'm sure newer players would appreciate reading those as well. As always, thank you for watching, subscribe if you haven't already for more Overwatch tips and tricks, and I will see you guys in the next one.